in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Okay, somebody help me out. Is it the middle of August? Because traditionally here on Point of View, this has been the slow period. The Supreme Court is in recess. Oftentimes Congress was going to take a significant August break and go back and talk with their constituents. It's usually a time when the president was on vacation, and this was a time when we weren't sure if we should do the Kerby Anderson Home and Garden Show or play music because nothing was happening. That's not exactly what we have in front of us right now. We're going to be spending some time with our good friend Gary Bauer talking about North Korea. And if that's not enough, of course, the events taking place in Charlottesville, Virginia, are certainly going to be another topic we will be addressing today. And there are all sorts of other topics we hopefully will get to the rest of the week because it has been a busy news day. Gary Bauer is a good friend of this ministry. He's the president of American Values, served for 8 years in the Reagan administration, probably most prominently as the chief domestic policy advisor, of course, also the chairman of the Campaign for Working Families. We've posted one of his end-of-day reports on our website dealing with North Korea. And Gary, it's a little busier than it normally is in August, isn't it?
Holy cow! I mean, this is unbelievable. August in Washington is an amazing time, and usually it's about 105 degrees here, and it's not a dry heat, and nothing's going on. The Congress is out, as you say, and presidents tend to go on vacations. But as with so many other things in our country, it seems to be a 24-hour-a-day news cycle, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year. And, of course, we've had all these controversies, the latest one being the just horrific events in Charlottesville, Virginia over the weekend, and now the firestorm aimed, I think, inexplicably at Donald Trump for what happened in Charlottesville and his reaction to it.
Well, again, we'll get into all of that, but let's spend just a minute or two, I would think, probably a little bit longer than that, on North Korea. Yeah. We've posted a couple of those, but I love this one that you did on Wednesday, August 9th. You talk about the Washington Post reported that North Korea had successfully miniaturized nuclear weapons. Intelligence reported that North Korea was loading cruise missiles onto patrol boats. Then there was the announcement that they might have a preemptive strike on Guam. And then Donald Trump said that any attempt to harm the U.S. or the allies would be met with fire fury. And yet, again, you say, okay, class, here's your only test question today. Whom did Senators Chuck Schumer, Dianne Feinstein, and John McCain attack yesterday evening after the events? And the answer is Donald Trump. You can't make this stuff out, can you?
You can't, and in a way, it almost makes one laugh, right? I mean, when you went through that list of things that had happened in that 24-hour period, you would think that any United States senator would be aiming their verbal fire at the government of North Korea and the things that it was doing that would put Americans in jeopardy or our allies in jeopardy. But Kerby, at the end of the day, it's not really a laughing matter because the North Korean government watches how Americans are reacting to all this. They monitor our media, et cetera. And at a time when we ought to be uniting behind the president's tough stance, we've got major political figures in town and our media undercutting the president. And by doing so, whether they understand this or not, I think they make war more likely because it's more likely that North Korea will misjudge what the possibilities are here and go so far that not only President Donald Trump, but any American president would have to respond to whatever they might do down the road.
And you're saying again that the leaders there in North Korea are watching. I'm thinking of someone else is watching, and that is the Ayatollahs and the mullahs in Iran, because how we handle North Korea could also affect how we may or may not adequately handle Iran, don't you think?
No question about that. And I think one of the big untold or underreported stories in all of this is the Iran factor here, because while North Korea and Iran are on opposite sides of the globe, they have an alliance that's gone on for years, for decades. They've been trading nuclear information on how to build ICBMs. They've traded information about how to build and fortify underground bunkers that might be impervious to most American weapons or munitions. When we find out, as I reported in that one end of day, that President Obama knew 3 or 4 years ago that North Korea likely had miniaturized a nuclear weapon, which means had gotten it down to the size where it can fit on an ICBM, an intercontinental ballistic missile, the first thought that he should have had was, wow, that means that now Iran can probably miniaturize a nuclear weapon, because these two rogue nations are exchanging information all the time. So we're facing a greater and greater threat from both of those countries. The last president really was sleepwalking in both cases. He did nothing to stop North Korea, and he actually empowered Iran by signing a horrible nuclear deal with them that ended up transferring billions of dollars to them. Other presidents have had a margin of error on this. You know, they've been able to delay and talk, but not actually take any action. Unfortunately, President Trump finds himself in the position where there's no maneuvering room left. The day that we know for sure that North Korea has multiple nuclear weapons that they can hit the United States with is the day that overt nuclear blackmail of the United States and the American people begins.
Well, we need to take a break, but when we come back, I want to talk about a couple of different issues. One is what can be done diplomatically. Resolution 2371 was passed 15-0. And I also want to maybe point out, as you did, Gary, the last time you had a unanimous vote in the Security Council went the other way in terms of Israel. We'll get into that in just a minute. But one of the pieces that we've posted for you to read on our website, and of course it will link you to American Values as well, is the one having to do with whether or not we can have both military action and diplomacy, this idea sort of a false choice. So we're going to get into that with Gary as well. And then I've got to at least get his comment. We talked about the senators, but there was at least one representative that actually said that he was convinced that Kim Jong-un is more rational than Donald Trump, which caused me to say the only thing I think you could say for sure is that Kim Jong-un is more rational than that member of Congress. But anyway, we'll get back to some of those issues in just a minute. And if you'd like to join us, we're going to, of course, focus some of our time and attention first on North Korea. Even though that has been bumped off the front pages because of what has happened in Charlottesville, we still want to focus on this because the threat did not go away simply because of some of the incidents taking place in Virginia. But then we're going to get to that topic as well. So along the way, if you'd like to join our conversation, make a comment, 1-800-351-1212. Privileged to have with us today Gary Bauer, President of American Values and also the Chairman of the Campaign for Working Families, PAC. We'll be back with more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, when President Everett Piper wrote his commentary about an incident on his campus, he had no idea that it would go viral with 3.5 million views. He told the story about one of his students who felt victimized after a university chapel on a sermon on 1 Corinthians 13, often known as the love chapter in Paul's epistle. He explained the philosophy at Oklahoma Wesleyan University and ended it by saying, "This is not a daycare, this is a university." He was in my studio with me last week promoting his new book, Not a Daycare, The Devastating Consequences of Abandoning Truth. He takes on the shocking examples of the snowflake insanity and the demand for safe spaces. He documents the dangerous intolerance on many university campuses, and he reminds us of the importance of protecting free speech. Before he moved to Oklahoma, he served as dean of students at a college in Michigan. He taught a freshman orientation course and had students watch the movie Schindler's List and then write a 3-page paper. One student wrote a paper that summarized the plot in historical detail, but she ended the paper by admitting, "Who am I to judge the Germans?" She just could not bring herself to say that what was done in Nazi Germany was evil or wrong. In his book, he cites other examples of non-judgmentalism that has infected the millennial generation. There is certainly a role for the church in this discussion. He recounts a time when he was on the TV program hosted by Bill O'Reilly, who voiced his exasperation with the lack of Christian leadership in the midst of these important cultural debates. Christians need to expose the self-refuting pablum of progressives. How tolerant is it to say, "I can't tolerate your intolerance"? And how isn't it hateful to say, "I hate you hateful people"? The book is destined to be a bestseller. I recommend you pick it up and read about the problem and his biblical solutions. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Sony Pictures, All Saints, the inspiring story of Pastor Michael Spurlock with John Corbett. In theaters August 25th, rated PG, allsaintsmovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Calls already coming in. I'll get to some of those in just a minute. Talking today with Gary Bauer. And Gary, one of the things we posted was your Thursday end-of-day report, in which you said you had just finished reading your copy of the the Washington Post, and you said it's kind of hard to tell the difference. So it isn't just some of the members of Congress, it's the way the media has covered some of this as well in North Korea, isn't it?
It really is. You know, I think I also said in that same report that I understand when the liberal media, faced between a choice of Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, chose Hillary Clinton. But really, when faced with a choice between Donald Trump or the leader of North Korea, to choose the leader of North Korea, that's pretty bad. And I mean, this is a regime that's despicable. It tortures people. It killed, obviously, that young American that they had in their prisons for a number of years and then sent him home in a coma. People that dissent in North Korea disappear and they're never heard from again. And they've been bedeviling American presidents for 30 years. President Clinton, President Bush, and President Obama all tried the diplomacy approach, brought the issue to the United Nations, sent emissaries to North Korea, and each time those American presidents declared victory, said that they had gotten concessions, but all during that time, accelerating the last 8 years, North Korea was working on both their missile plan and on their nuclear weapon plan, and they now appear to be right on the brink of closing the deal on both of those things. And it just seems to me that to have newspapers like the Washington Post, the New York Times, commentators, etc., suggesting that the real threat here is Donald Trump. He's the real threat to peace, not the government of North Korea. It's just beyond the pale in my view.
Well, and as you point out, a lot of this is just a bias against Donald Trump. You made a comment in one of your commentaries about the fact that if Hillary Clinton were the president and said something about fire and fury, the press would probably say, well, she's the Iron Lady of America. So a lot of this has to do with who Donald Trump is, don't you think?
Oh, it's absolutely. Now, look, I don't want to get too deep in the woods here. Most people are not foreign policy experts, and but I think this is a really revealing point. We have treaties with countries in Europe, mostly under the umbrella of NATO, and we've got treaties with our allies in the Pacific. And these treaties are for our benefit as much as it is for our allies, because it's a dangerous world. So when President Trump went to Europe, he had a couple of trips there, but on one of those trips, he chose not to repeat a treaty obligation. He didn't say it publicly that we have under NATO, where we will defend any NATO member against an attack from any other country. And the media and the liberals jumped all over him. They said he was being weak on Russia by not saying in Russia's backyard, by the way, if you attack anybody in Western Europe, we will join them and attack you. So here it is a couple of months later, and he's dealing with Pacific allies, and he says to North Korea, you need to understand, if you attack Japan or South Korea or Guam or any of our allies in the Pacific, we will attack you back. There will be fire and fury. They attack him for being a warmonger. So in Europe, he didn't say what he said in the Pacific, but in both cases, their reaction was their hair coming on fire. In both cases, they concluded that he didn't know what he was doing. He was outrageous. He was unlike any other American president. So that tells me that no matter, because these are binary decisions, right? They either uphold these treaties or not.
Yeah.
So no matter what part of that decision he took, yes, I will defend our allies. No, I won't defend our allies. The left attacked him either way.
Well, and one of the things you talk about in the piece that we've posted here, and again, people can go to your website and follow the link and sign up, which I encourage people always to do if they have not, is that his comments were not formally vetted. Now, you served under Ronald Reagan. Who did Ronald Reagan vet all of his statements about foreign policy with?
I was in the Reagan administration all 8 years, and certainly every president will sit down with his military advisors and solicit their advice and counsel on what the policy ought to be. But this was a case where the policy's already been made. That is, we have treaty obligations to our allies in the Pacific. So the idea that President Trump, when he merely said what has been American policy for 30 years, North Korea, if you attack our allies or us, we will attack you back, that he had to run that by somebody is just absurd.
I know. Well, I had to bring that up. You served in the Reagan administration. Just the thought of Ronald Reagan saying, "Now, can I say this?" As a matter of fact, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. There were a lot of people that didn't want him to say that, but he didn't let that bother him. He said it anyway, didn't he?
He did. And look, Kerby, getting back to no matter what he does, right? When he appointed another general a few months ago on his White House staff, a bunch of liberals in Washington said the president is putting our government in the hands of generals. Doesn't he understand our government is supposed to be civilian? But then as our civilian president, when he makes a statement about our foreign policy, they say, why did you run it by the generals? So, again, there is nothing he can do. I'm convinced if he says the sun tomorrow will rise in the east, that there will be 75 congressmen who will sign the letter that will say, you idiot, it clearly rises in the west.
Let's take some phone calls along the way. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Gary Bauer with us, and we are talking about North Korea. We'll get into some other issues in just a minute because he's also issued, as you might imagine, an end-of-day report that I've already received and some others that will be coming out later in the day on what has been happening in Virginia. But let's go to Peoria, Illinois first. Alexis, you're on with Gary Bauer.
Yes. Hello, Gary.
Hi, Alexis. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. What's on your mind?
Well, I think, as I stated earlier, John McCain needs to step to the other side of the aisle because he's not a Republican. Feinstein needs to get out of office, and Schumer needs to retire. These people are not looking for the American people's best interest. They don't care. All they want is their agenda to survive. If we'd have been with Hillary Clinton, let me tell you, she'd have said, go ahead, Korea, do it.
Yep. Let me get into that for just a minute because, Gary, you and I are a little bit older than some of our younger listeners, but we can remember a day not so long ago where partisanship ended at the water's edge. And whether it was the World War II, Korean War, certainly even Desert Storm, even some of the things that happened after 9/11, that seems to have been, really seems to have evaporated over the last couple of years, don't you think?
It really has, and it's another sign of the deep divisions in our country that are hurting us in so many different ways, but on the international scene, particularly hurting us in a world that is increasingly dangerous. And it's not increasingly dangerous because of President Trump. It's increasingly dangerous because you've got all sorts of really terrible regimes that are on their way to getting weapons of mass destruction. And that will be a very dangerous world for the United States to preserve its liberty in and the safety of the American people. So I would just say to our friends on the other side of the aisle, privately, say to the president whatever you want on these issues related to North Korea and so forth, but publicly, we all ought to be sending a message to our enemies to not misjudge robust debate in the United States as an indication of American weakness. What all these people ought to be saying, members of Congress of both parties, is that if anybody attacks the United States or our allies, that America will be united and we will be strong and we will defend ourselves and our people.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll get into a few more of those issues, not the least of which is Seoul, Korea is only 35 miles from the DMZ, and what real options are there. And also this kind of false choice that the media has created. Either we pursue military action or diplomacy. That's another piece that's in the Gary Bauer piece that we've posted today, which we, again, encourage you to find out more about and go to our American Values and subscribe to the End of Day Report so that you can find out a little bit more about what's taking place. If you'd like to join us, we'll take another phone call or two in just a minute. 1-800-351-1212. As you go to the website, you can find out more about Gary Bauer, American Values, and also, of course, my commentary today. It's based on the conversation we had with President Everett Piper in studio last week. Not a daycare, and that's another issue we'll probably get to later this week. But we need to take a break. We'll come back and take some more phone calls right after this.
From Affirm Films and Provident Films, who brought you War Room, comes All Saints. New pastor Michael Spurlock, his struggling congregation, and a group of refugees come together, trusting God as they plant seeds for a future that might just save them all.
Start a farm, we work together, we save the church.
All Saints, starring John Corbett. In theaters August 25th, rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. More information is available at allsaintsmovie.com.
Point of View Radio wants to fuel change in our culture, but we need your help to do it. And I use the word need very intentionally. I worked with a well-known radio ministry for 29 years, a program that helped a lot of people. They got saved, they got elected to Congress. It produced a lot of good. But people started thinking that someone else would give, and that program isn't here anymore. Your gift today can make sure that doesn't happen to Point of View. Visit pointofview.net and click the banner Change Happens With You, or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net at 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation with Gary Bauer, again with American Values. We're talking about North Korea at the moment, but we'll get into the issue of what's been taking place in Charlottesville, Virginia. But again, just because that has really bumped North Korea off the front pages doesn't mean that there isn't a significant threat. We've posted a very good article by Gary Bauer. It's one of his end-of-day reports. I said this before. I support this organization. Encourage you to do so as well. Encourage you to sign up to get the end-of-day report and to support what is happening there at American Values. But let's also take a few more phone calls because I know some of you would like to make some comments about this. Gary Bauer served 8 years in the Reagan White House, and so as a result, I wanted to go to James in Farmington, New Mexico. I think you had some comments about Ronald Reagan, so go for it.
Kerby, I may have the timing wrong here, but didn't Ronald Reagan say into an open mic he didn't know the mic was being broadcast? He said, the Soviet Union is an evil empire, and we're going to begin bombing immediately.
Well, you got two together. One is he did say it was an evil empire to the National Association of Evangelicals. But Gary also, of course, there was a mic, and I think he might have known it was open when he was testing about the fact we'll bomb immediately. What about that?
Yes, that is interesting that James got those two things and made them one, which is makes it even a little scarier, I guess. But, no, he did feel very strongly that Russia, Soviet Union, was an evil empire, and he said it in a speech and was attacked much the way Donald Trump gets attacked today when he says things that are considered undiplomatic. And then there was this incident. Some people think he knew the mic was on. Other people thought that he did not know, but it was clearly a joke. I think he actually said something about lobbing one into the men's room in the Kremlin or whatever. But at any rate, no. But other than that, that's exactly right. Both of those things happened.
Yeah. James, do you see a parallel to Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump at all? Guess I'll leave it on that. Let's take another phone call real quickly. Yeah, go ahead.
I like what both of them wanted to do. I like the way Reagan did it a little better than Donald Trump. I wish he would do it a little better. Can I make one more comment about microphones?
Please do.
I believe Donald Trump was in India, and again, the mic was on. He didn't know it, and he told his staff, he said, India would receive no help from the United States with their nuclear program or something. Excuse me for not being accurate, but I know that happened. That they would be told very bluntly that they would receive no help with their nuclear program.
Yeah. You know, Gary, one of the lessons you can learn there is every microphone is on, right?
Oh, my goodness. Every microphone is on, and increasingly here in Washington, even if there is no microphone in the room, you have to assume that somebody's recording what you're saying, which is another very uncomfortable feeling. You know, I've used a new yardstick, Kerby, that unless I'm willing to say it on Point of View, I don't say it in my office. So
It's probably a good idea. Yes. Let's take another phone call because, Sheldon, I think your father served in the Korean War, and this is the real concern about what this might look like if we indeed have some kind of confrontation between the United States and North Korea. Sheldon, go for it.
Yes, sir. I worked on the Kings Bay Naval Base down here in southeast Georgia, nuclear submarine base, back in the latter 80s and early 90s, and I finished in explosive handling wharf. But my daddy, he had deformed fingers and toes from about froze to death in that Korean War.
Yes.
You know, and
this one would take place a lot faster, I fear, though, with all the armaments that are in North Korea and even the possibility of tunnels under the demilitarized zone and, of course, the possibility of even not being able to take out everything in North Korea. This is what has to be concerning the generals right now, if they're even coming up with, and I suppose they are, plans that hopefully never have to be used, but plans to actually attack North Korea. This is something that I'm sure is of great concern to General Mattis and a variety of other individuals that are thinking through what this might mean.
There's no question about it, Kerby. And to Sheldon, God bless you and your father's service in the Korean War. Look, we pay a lot of money for our military, hundreds of billions of dollars a year, and as one general said the other day, this is what we pay them that money for, which is to have in place scenarios and how to deal with them. And I know there's been a lot of planning that has been done in recent years about how to deal with North Korea, and there's been a lot of updates of those plans in recent weeks as it's become evident that North Korea is further along in obtaining nuclear weapons and ICBMs to deliver them. I don't believe in any of those plans there's any thought to doing what we did in the Korean War, which is send hundreds of thousands of ground troops into Korea. That would be a disastrous, and it's hard to see how that scenario would come out well. Having said that, as you point out, Kerby, the options are very restricted, and it's hard to know what's the best thing to do. On the other hand, the options become almost non-existent a year or 2 years from now, because North Korea will still have all that artillery aimed at the South, but then they will have nuclear weapons and ICBMs that are able to hit the mainland of the United States literally in less than 45 minutes from the time that they're fired. So I know that there are things being looked at, including is it possible to take out the North Korean government with some sort of special forces strike? Would it be possible to destroy in one strike all of their nuclear weapons? At the same time, in diplomatic channels, informing them that if their response to that is to attack South Korea, that we literally will level North Korea. So there are scenarios that one can play through. None of them are easy. None of them are guaranteed to work. But I think the assumption is that even somebody as fanatical as North Korea's leader does not want to lose power and see his country leveled to the ground. And so he might be deterred if we're firm with him. Unfortunately, what every leader of North Korea has seen for 30 years are presidents that seem to be firm, but at the end of the day didn't do anything. And so he and his generals, North Korean generals, have been trained to not believe the United States when we say you better not cross this line. And that's why the problem that Donald Trump is now facing is not his own, but it's the failures of at least 3 previous United States presidents.
Well, and again, just think about it. Kim Il-sung and then Kim Jong-il, and now, of course, we have Kim Jong-un. I mean, you've got 3 generations there that have, as you said, learned not to believe what the presidents might say. And so the only question is whether they might believe this one. Let me just real quickly take another call here before we take another break. In Texas, KCTA, Susan, thank you for calling today.
Yes, thank you for speaking to me. I had a question. Do you know if it's true and what administration did this? But I understand that there was, after the Korean War, there was only an armistice signed, and is that just a ceasefire?
Yes, that's
There's
basically
never really an end to the Korean War.
See, a peace treaty is when one side wins and the other side loses, and they come to the table and sign it. And of course, this is why you have a demilitarized zone, a DMZ. And of course, the other day, Senator Lindsey Graham was calling for Congress to give authority to the president to use military action. And I think that's appropriate. But the bottom line is that authority, if you think about it, Gary's never been withdrawn because we're still sort of in a state of hostility with North Korea even to this day, aren't we?
That's exactly right. Lindsey Graham is a smart senator, but I think he missed the boat on this one because obviously we had the President Truman had the legal authority during the Korean War. That authority resides with presidents unless it's revoked, and it hasn't been revoked, and the war hasn't ended. There was merely this ceasefire and armistice, and so I don't think there would need to be another vote by the Congress. On the other hand, Kerby, I would almost, unless it was an emergency, I almost would want such a vote.
Me too.
I would want to make liberals go on the record and say they weren't willing to take military action to prevent a crazy man from getting nuclear weapons.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we will take some more phone calls. In the second hour, we're going to get into Charlottesville, but before I let Gary Bauer go, I wanted to get some of his comments, not only about the events in Charlottesville, but also as well the way in which the media has covered this issue as well. If you didn't think that the mainstream media didn't have it in for Donald Trump, certainly all the things happening in North Korea would give you one indication, and the way the president has been covered over the last few days about this would give you another indication. We'll talk about that right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The topic of immunizations can be controversial to many. Some even have a religious objection to having their children immunized as a requirement to attend public schools. Those objections often fall on deaf ears, but some states have provided for a religious exemption for parents who, for religious reasons, object to their children receiving the needle. Florida falls into that category. So naturally, when Patrick Flynn informed his Florida school that he was invoking that exemption, he was surprised to hear the school refused to follow the law. So he filed a lawsuit. Now, there's an important fact that I haven't told you yet. The school is a private Catholic school. It's not a public school. As such, it is itself protected by the First Amendment to make its own policies in keeping with their faith. A unanimous state appellate court sided with the Catholic diocese, citing the doctrine of church autonomy. Siding with Flynn would, quote, further his own religious views at the expense of the diocese on the topic of immunizations, wrote the court. Quote, we are convinced that a secular court should not be making the judgment as to which side's religious view of immunization is to be respected, unquote. In other words, while Flynn has a right to the protection of his religious beliefs, he may not use the state's judicial arm to compel a private religious institution to depart from its religious beliefs. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Guide at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Gary Bauer with us for just a few more minutes, President of American Values. When I get into Charlottesville, let me take one more call related to North Korea, and we'll go to Missouri. Kay, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Yes, I've been listening to all this on the news, but I feel like these are our allies that are over there, and he's been threatening them for quite a while. And then to threaten Guam, and you've got Japan that we have promised that we would take care of them militarily, and we should be. Now they're all concerned because they're coming here, but why shouldn't we have been concerned when they had an ability to hurt the people that we promised to take care of?
Well said.
So, I mean,
yeah. Why is it that it's only in our interest when we are threatened and none of our allies. Now, of course, we know, Gary, that there has been the attempt by almost every president, and we'll talk about President Obama, President Bush, or President Clinton. We can go all the way back. So Republicans and Democrats kick the can down the road because nobody wants a confrontation. But the bottom line is that only now when we're talking about Guam or Alaska or Hawaii or Los Angeles do we say, well, we got to do something now. Well, we should have been doing something a long time ago, don't you think?
It is a great point. And, there's a consequence for not standing with your allies and keeping your promises, which is that every country tries to self-preserve, to take care of themselves. And so if Japan and South Korea and countries like Taiwan and the Philippines and Australia, if these countries all decide that our word is not any good, that we really won't help them if they're attacked by China or North Korea, they will go on and develop their own nuclear weapons to defend themselves. And, of course, a world in which every country has nuclear weapons is a world where it's almost inevitable somebody's going to make a mistake. So if you want peace, love peace, want our children and grandchildren to grow up in a decent world, then periodically we're going to have to do tough things to stop countries like North Korea from getting nuclear weapons.
Just before we go, though, I wanted to talk a little bit about Charlottesville, if for no other reason than how the press, especially those in Washington, D.C., where you're located, have covered this. Now, the president just a while ago, less than an hour ago, said that racism is evil and those who cause violence in its name are criminals and thugs, including the KKK, neo-Nazis, and white supremacists and other hate groups that are repugnant to everything we hold dear as Americans, and went on and made some other statements, which I'll read in the second hour. But it's a good illustration, again, that no matter what the president says before this statement, every other statement was inadequate. It did not go far enough. And I recognize that words mean something, and the president might have been more specific. But at the same time, again, you can't win for losing these same days, doesn't seem like.
Well, you're absolutely right. Look, I would encourage everybody listening. The president made a statement on Saturday afternoon when events were unfolding in Charlottesville. And if you go Google President Trump's Saturday statement on Charlottesville and read it for yourself, you'll see it's a beautiful, comprehensive statement. I mean, it's very strong. He says here he condemns in the strongest possible terms displays of hatred, bigotry, and violence. He says it has no place in America. We need to restore law and order. Later in the statement on Saturday, he says, above all else, we must remember this truth, no matter our color, creed, religion, or political party. We are all Americans first. We love our country. We love our God. We love our flag. We are proud of our country. It was a beautiful statement, much stronger than many of the statements that Barack Obama made when there was rioting going on and policemen being killed. But the media and the left attacked the president because he did not name specific hate groups. And the firestorm, Kerby, has been probably one of the worst ones of this entire administration. So today, the president did a press conference, and he specifically named the Ku Klux Klan, neo-Nazis, white nationalists, etc., as being haters, and that there would be a full investigation, and anybody that had violated the law, the full force of the law, would be brought against them. But I think, again, the reaction to this was all out of proportion, and it's part of this ongoing effort to reverse the results of the presidential election in which 63 million Americans voted for Donald Trump for president.
Yes. Well, I might just mention that this is one of the reasons why I encourage people to find out more about American values. You just put out, just a while ago, a special alert. It looks like you're going to have two coming out today, the special alert and then a follow-up one as well. And I think it's important because if all you knew about Donald Trump's message was how it was covered in the mainstream press, you would not have an accurate understanding of what took place. So that's why I encourage people to get your end-of-day report, even to sign up now. Maybe they'll get that special alert and find out a little bit more. Read the actual words, have an understanding of the context, and maybe you'll have a much better understanding of what is happening in our country and have a greater discernment, which is something we talk about so often here on Point of View. So people can go to American Values. We have a link there. Of course, we've posted one of your end-of-day reports, and I would encourage people to sign up and also to support your ministry.
Well, thank you, Kerby. I'm really proud of the partnership that you and I have had and Point of View has had with the work I do in Washington. I can't think of any better place, and you're really the first place I like to go to make comments on the news and what's going on, and we hope to continue to do that. I think we can both be fairly sure that we're not going to run out of material.
This is the middle of August. You and I have been around long enough to remember when this was just the summer doldrums, and it's anything but. So thank you for joining us today here on Point of View. Let's do it again soon.
Absolutely, Kerby. God bless.
Gary Bauer with, again, American Values. Now, in the second hour, we're going to get into this in much more detail. I've done a couple of things. First of all, we posted this very good article, which I'm going to read from, by a good friend, Mark Bailey, who's president of Dallas Theological Seminary, The Absurdity of a Supreme Race. And I'm going to add to it some things he doesn't have in there that I thought would be good for you to see. Then there was a good piece that came out in Christianity Today, Charlottesville and the Church's Response. Ed Stetzer wrote that particular piece, and I wanted you to see this. Then I'm going to get into a little more detail for those of you that are still with me about what is the alt-right. And so we have posted a piece by David French. There's some others I want to get into. Jeffrey Tucker does a very good job of saying, where do some of these ideas come from? And then there's a whole section, and some of this we may not even be able to cover today. Maybe we'll have to cover it tomorrow, on the issue of identity politics. The Wall Street Journal today has talked about the poison of identity politics, and Rod Dreher's been on the program with us talking about this as well. So we're going to get into this in a little more detail. So if that would be of interest to you, I hope you'll stay tuned in the second hour. If by chance you have a radio station that cannot carry the second hour, and I understand that, you can listen online or maybe even download our podcast. And I will, of course, take phone calls along the way because there's a lot to cover. But first of all, when we come back, I'll read a little bit more of the statement issued today by President Trump, then get into kind of a theological issue for just a minute. Why is it, first of all, that we reject as Christians, and as we should, this idea of a superior race? Where does that idea come from? And then how do we begin to think our way through some of the incidents that have unfolded there in Charlottesville? So that is an open line in the second hour. Tomorrow I'm going to also have some guests to address this issue as well. So if you'd like to join us at any point, 1-800-351-1212. Look for the articles we've posted today. I think they will be helpful to you, maybe as you're trying to articulate a response. Maybe some of these articles you might want to post on your Facebook page or your Twitter page. I've done this, and I would encourage you to do that as well. Let's take a break. We'll continue our conversation right after this.
Would you like to be above average or exceptional? I'll explain how you can be in a moment. What do you think about change? Some people love it, others not so much. I'm guessing you agree our culture needs change. But how will that happen? Change happens with you and your influence. If each of us does our part, God can change the culture through us. That's a goal at Point of View, to help you change things around you. We never charge for the information we deliver each day, but that information is not free. There is a significant cost in getting it to you. You know who helps us do that? About 1 out of every 800 listeners to Point of View. So you can be above average. You can be exceptional by visiting pointofview.net and clicking the banner Change Happens with You, or by calling 1-800-347-5151. Thank you for being exceptional by supporting Point of View. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. First hour, spent a fair amount of time talking about North Korea, and we will still take those phone calls. I see I have one on that, and if you don't mind waiting, we'll get to your call in just a minute. But we're also going to focus our time and attention in this hour on Charlottesville. We've got some guests coming in tomorrow to maybe also address that issue. By the way, I might just mention that in the first hour, I have Kirk Cameron with us, and I did want to keep him in the schedule because sometimes we need to get away from the news cycle every once in a while, and he's got this wonderful film coming out about the heart of a family, so we'll talk about that with him, but then we'll get back into the news cycle as we always do. I suspect on Wednesday, our Millennial Roundtable will get into this, and of course even Friday weekend edition. So there'll be lots of opportunities for us to address these issues. But I want to, first of all, give credit where credit is due. The president has been criticized because he was not explicit enough. So just a little over an hour ago, gave an address in which, let me quote directly two of the paragraphs, and you can, of course, read it in its entirety if you'd like on the White House website or in other venues. But President Donald Trump said, "Racism is evil, and those who cause violence in its name are criminals and thugs, including the KKK, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and other hate groups that are repugnant to everything we hold dear as Americans." Went on to say that we are equal in the eyes of our Creator. We are equal under the law and under our Constitution. He also, of course, addresses the issue of where James Field, who drove his car into a crowd of protesters, killed one woman, injured at least 19 others. We'll give you an update on that a little bit later. But he says, to anyone who acted criminally at this weekend's racist violence, you will be held fully accountable. Justice will be fully delivered. As I said on Saturday, we condemn this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence. It has no place in America. As I said many times before, no matter the color of our skin, we all live under the same laws. We all salute the same great flag, and we are all made in the same Almighty God. And, of course, he had spent some time before this talking with the Attorney General Jeff Sessions and FBI Director, who was newly confirmed, Christopher Wray. So that's where we are in that particular issue. Lots of things to cover here today, and all the way through, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. The first article that I have posted on the website is one I've also posted on my own Facebook page and even told our Sunday school class that it would be good to read. And it is by the president of Dallas Theological Seminary, Mark Bailey. It has the title, "The Absolute Absurdity of a Supreme Race." And that is, he says, any Bible-believing Christian should be deeply grieved at the weekend events in Charlottesville, Virginia. Any thought of white supremacy or the priority of one shade of skin over another has to be a bad stench in the nostrils of God, who made each and every human being in his own image, and puts down Genesis 1:26 and 27. But he says not only does an idea contradict, or such an idea contradict the biblical revelation of creation, it also mitigates against the intended target of the Great Commission by which Jesus commanded his disciples to reach and teach all nations, Matthew 28, verses 19 and 20. He said such an international heartbeat extends from God's creation through the Great Commission all the way to the grand consummation anticipated in Revelation 4 and 5, where people redeemed from every tribe, every tongue, every nation, every people form an international chorus that joins the angelic host in lauding and applauding the greatness of our Father and Son for their ministry carried out through human history by means of the Holy Spirit. To practice and promote any idea of racial supremacy is therefore contrary to the nature of God and his revelation in Scripture. Even his special choice of Israel was for the purpose that all the nations of the world and of the earth would be blessed as they respond in faith to the seed of Abraham, the promised Messiah, Jesus Christ. So anyway, this is one of the points that he makes, and it really is a twofold point, because first of all, he makes the absurdity of any idea of a supreme race or an inferior race ridiculous in light of first the biblical account of creation, that God has created all of us in his image, Genesis 1:26 and 27, and then add to that also the idea of the Great Commission that Jesus commands his disciples to reach and to also teach all nations, Matthew 28. But you might be saying, where does this idea then of a superior race and an inferior race come from? Well, partly you could say from sin nature. I mean, in the past, we've had, every race, probably every country in one way or another, maybe thought of themselves as superior. I have a commentary coming out on Monday in which I say, well, think about the Greeks and the Romans, for example. They thought of themselves as superior to the barbarians. But I say, if you want to really find the origin of the modern idea of inferior races, you need look no further than Charles Darwin. That's right. Look at the title of his book. Everybody remembers the first couple of words of his title, On the Origin of Species, but it goes on the origin of species by means of natural selection or the preservation of favored races in the struggle of life. And so you can already see that there was this kind of idea that Charles Darwin had, that morality itself was evolving and that there was an evolution from savagery to civility. And so it was the idea that he thought that when civilized nations come into contact with barbarians, sooner or later the native races go away. And of course they had seen that with colonialism. So he then began to make some really interesting statements in his next book, The Descent of Man. And in there, he said, at some future period, not very distant as measured by centuries, the civilized races of man will almost certainly exterminate and replace throughout the world the savage races. At the same time, the anthropomorphic apes will no doubt be exterminated as well. And he says the break will then be rendered wider, for it will intervene between man and a more civilized state, as we may hope, than the Caucasians, in other words, the whites, and some ape as lowly as the baboon, instead of as present between what he called the Negro or the Australian and the gorilla. You can read it for yourself in The Descent of Man, but he believed that the white race was in one way or another superior, and that eventually Africans and Aborigines and others would eventually just go extinct because they were inferior races. Now, here's the irony, because in one sense, he was an abolitionist. He and the Wedgwoods and the Wilberforces and others were those who actually tried to end the slave trade. So on the one hand, Charles Darwin was an abolitionist and probably a good Englishman. But on the other hand, in his books, he promoted the idea of there being superior races and inferior races, and we, in some respects, are still dealing with that legacy to this very day. When we come back, we're going to get into this in a little more detail, but if you'd like to join our conversation, if nothing else, I wanted to start with that, because in some respects, this is a clash of worldviews. So how do we think about this biblically, and how do we apply biblical principles to some of the things we've seen unfolding in Charlottesville? If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, when President Everett Piper wrote his commentary about an incident on his campus, he had no idea that it would go viral with 3.5 million views. He told the story about one of his students who felt victimized after a university chapel on a sermon on 1 Corinthians 13, often known as the love chapter in Paul's epistle. He explained the philosophy at Oklahoma Wesleyan University and ended it by saying, "This is not a daycare, this is a university." He was in my studio with me last week promoting his new book, Not a Daycare, The Devastating Consequences of Abandoning Truth. He takes on the shocking examples of the snowflake insanity and the demand for safe spaces. He documents the dangerous intolerance on many university campuses, and he reminds us of the importance of protecting free speech. Before he moved to Oklahoma, he served as dean of students at a college in Michigan. He taught a freshman orientation course and had students watch the movie Schindler's List and then write a 3-page paper. One student wrote a paper that summarized the plot in historical detail, but she ended the paper by admitting, "Who am I to judge the Germans?" She just could not bring herself to say that what was done in Nazi Germany was evil or wrong. In his book, he cites other examples of non-judgmentalism that has infected the millennial generation. There is certainly a role for the church in this discussion. He recounts a time when he was on the TV program hosted by Bill O'Reilly, who voiced his exasperation with the lack of Christian leadership in the midst of these important cultural debates. Christians need to expose the self-refuting pablum of progressives. How tolerant is it to say, "I can't tolerate your intolerance"? And how isn't it hateful to say, "I hate you hateful people"? The book is destined to be a bestseller. I recommend you pick it up and read about the problem and his biblical solutions. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Sony Pictures, All Saints, the inspiring story of Pastor Michael Spurlock with John Corbett. In theaters August 25th, rated PG, allsaintsmovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. First hour, spent some time talking about North Korea. Let me take a call on that, and then we'll get back to what is happening in Charlottesville. Lots of issues to address in terms of identity politics, how the church should respond, even the whole idea of what is the alt-right and what are some of those vile ideas, where they're coming from, how are they promoted. We'll try to get into as much of that as possible today, and we'll also, of course, cover some of that tomorrow as well. Let's go back to the phones first of all, and in Michigan, Keith, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hi, thank you very much. Hey, I know that you're talking about everything else instead of not just North Korea, but as a comment about North Korea is that human nature is to fall to evil. I mean, that's just, it's sin nature.
Sure.
But the thing about the North Koreans is that I served in South Korea back in the 90s. I grew up with Ronald Reagan being president and then Clinton. And back in the 90s, it was understood that we are going to be attacked. It didn't matter how it was. I served in both tank battalions, the only tank battalions in all of Asia, Pacific Asia, in the United States Army during that time, and we knew we had missiles directed right at us. There was no way that, as soon as the alarm went off, we were going to run out and be attacked. And it's, we just lived with it. The thing about it, though, is we knew that was a crazy person that was living up there. And we knew that we were here to protect not just the South Koreans, but America. And so it was a way of life. I mean, you just knew that you were going to die if we ever got attacked. But it was North Korea. I've read a lot of people and served with a lot of people who even fought during the Korean War, and it ultimately is an evil nation. I mean, with the...
Yeah, if you're looking for evil empire, there it is. And matter of fact, when you were there, I think Kim Jong-il was actually the president. Now, of course, his son, Kim Jong-un.
No, actually, it was Kim Il-sung.
Kim Il-sung. So all the way back to the grandfather. So there you go. But each one of them were crazy in one way or another. I think the grandson is the craziest of the three. But nevertheless, that's the point. But again, when we talked about this earlier, about this idea of the evil empire, this is probably one that deserves that designation more than any other. As we pointed out, every year when they put out the list of those nations where the greatest persecution of Christians takes place, North Korea is at the top of the list. The other 9 then are Muslim nations, but the worst place in the world to be a Christian is in North Korea because, again, it's, as you said, it's a hermit kingdom. It's an evil empire, and it is, I think, evil incarnate. And this is what we're facing in terms of the military action that we might have to take.
And what is that? There was even a song that was about it that had to deal with I can't think of it right now, but it had to deal with the type of personality. It was like a godlike personality, yes. With a total control of the people. And the thing is that if given the opportunity, power will consolidate. It's a natural tendency for human nature is to consolidate power to one person.
Yes.
And that's against God's design. I mean, it's all power should be with God. But it's always to consolidate to some despot type of person. And you always have to have some type of protection and always, all the time, everybody needs to be on guard. And that's what we need to do as an Americans is to make sure we do not follow suit to how the North Koreans are doing. So it's very important.
Well, Keith, thank you for your service. And again, what you are basically reiterating is that famous quote from Lord Acton, and that is, absolute power corrupts absolutely, because we believe in human sin nature. And while we're talking about the evil of North Korea, let's use this now as a transition to the evil of racism, which we're going to be talking about. So let's go to Stockton, California. And Ray, thank you for joining us today here.
Thank you for taking my call.
What would you like to add to our conversation?
Well, what I'd like to ask the conversation is you made a comment about, this made me call, you made a comment about finding a source of how all this happened. All this evil happens, this racism happens. Well, we have to remember where we are and who was cast down here, this earth. That evil spirit is the one that's the spoiler, that's one to disrupt. The main thing that Jesus said that we all need to do is love our neighbors as we love ourselves. And in this country, we have a division. We have a division of Christianity, Muslims, Protestants, Catholics, all these divisions that broke up the Church of Christ, which is love, and giving up your own self for love, for your neighbor, for your brother. Racism will go away. And these things are taught at home. They're taught at home. And so if you are not looking at God's word daily, you're going to get swallowed up by it. You'll jump in it, and you'll be just like them. He told us, Jesus said, you'll know my disciples by the love that they have among themselves. The problem I see is people don't love themselves first. You cannot give out love if you don't love yourself. These people are loveless. Remember what he said? The man of loveliness will come in. And these are the things he does, cause disruption and fighting, killing, murder. This is the adversary that all Christians, Muslims, no matter what religion believe you are, we got to practice. Now, when I mean practice, we got to practice love like we go to the gym. We go 24-hour fitness and you know, shape. We got to get love in shape.
Well, this adversary has a name, right?
Yes, he has a name. His name is Satan.
Yeah.
The devil,
one of my callers used to get upset that we would never mention Satan. We'd say the evil one or the adversary or whatever.
No.
We need to give it a name, too, because we talk about who our enemies are, and we always criticize people because we can't say radical Muslim terrorism, or in this case, we can't talk about the evil of Nazis or neo-Nazis or white supremacists. Ultimately, I think you're bringing us back to the obvious answer to the question is, where does this ultimately come from? Well, it comes from Satan. Now, the bottom line is he uses human agents to portray that. And when we come back from the break, I want to spend just a little bit of time talking about where some of these ideas are found, because they're found in some of these books and they're found in the various speeches given by some of these individuals. And so I don't want to delve too much into the evil and the darkness, but I think it's about time to maybe give some clarity to what this alt-right is all about. So that's certainly one of those things we're going to talk about. But let me also talk about how the church itself should respond. That's why I've posted this second article by Ed Stetzer that appears in Christianity Today. And that is, he believes that it is really important for us to speak out. And he says, for example, as a white evangelical, part of the demographic category who disproportionately supported Donald Trump, he's let me start by saying this movement is antithetical to the gospel. It is an abomination for all that we stand for, and it must be condemned on every level of leadership in the church. He said there's no room for waffling. We cannot sit in silence hoping this will pass. Now, he spends a fair amount of time criticizing the president because he did not, on the Saturday announcement, specifically call out groups. And so he goes and quotes from one of the Twitter posts by Senator Marco Rubio. Senator Marco Rubio said nothing patriotic about Nazis, KKK, or white supremacists. It's the direct opposite of what America seeks to be. And so I think some of that has been resolved, as I said, as we started this hour, on what Donald Trump actually had announced just a few hours ago. But then he goes on to say that he's really called for individuals, especially in the white church, to really speak to this issue. He said, I wrote about what we owe to our friends of color who felt betrayed and wounded when so many white evangelicals voted for Trump. He said in that article he wrote a while back, I offered a number of ways we can reconcile. And he said, months later, now my call remains. And there's a long line of evangelicals who believe the same thing. Our silence on issues of injustice is sin. And he says, years ago, Reverend Billy Graham, who spoke out on racial injustice on many occasions, once said, the gospel has no meaning unless it helps those who are hurting or in need. He says those are strong words that need heeding today. And so then in the article, which you can read in its entirety, he gives us 3 steps that we can take to really begin to speak to this issue. So I wanted you to have that article. It's on the website, pointofview.net. When we come back, we're going to spend a little bit more time talking about where do these ideas come from. Certainly, Ray's help us understand where ultimately they come from, but who are the spokespeople that are promoting this? And if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Let's get your calls right after these important messages.
Would you like to be above average or exceptional? I'll explain how you can be in a moment. What do you think about change? Some people love it, others not so much. I'm guessing you agree our culture needs change, but how will that happen? Change happens with you and your influence. If each of us does our part, God can change the culture through us. That's a goal at Point of View, to help you change things around you. We never charge for the information we deliver each day, but that information is not free. There is a significant cost in getting it to you. You know who helps us do that? About 1 out of every 800 listeners to Point of View. So you can be above average. You can be exceptional by visiting pointofview.net and clicking the banner Change Happens with You, or by calling 1-800-347-5151. Thank you for being exceptional by supporting Point of View. Pointofview.net at 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. If you'd like to join our conversation, an open line, 1-800-351-1212. Love to get your reactions to what has happened in Charlottesville, Virginia, the whole issue of taking down various statues to Confederate generals, the reaction from, first of all, the so-called alt-right. We'll talk more about that in just a minute, as well as your reaction to how the press was covering this, how the police were, in many cases, standing down, maybe allowing some of that to take place, and, of course, even how the president, the attorney general, and now the FBI director have responded. So if you'd like to join that conversation, 1-800-351-1212. As a program note, let me just mention that tomorrow we'll have Kirk Cameron with us. We're going to be talking about his new film about family. I think you're really going to enjoy that. And then we'll get back into this issue. I have at least one guest I know that just about confirmed that we'll be speaking to what we can and should do to maybe lessen some of the tensions that actually surfaced in Charlottesville and some others. So if you'd like to join us at any point, 1-800-351-1212. The third article we've posted on the website related to this is one by David French. We quote from him quite often, in which he says that the alt-right chickens come home to roost. And he starts out by saying, really, it's not the responsibility of the president to make a specific statement every time you've got some group, whatever it might be, marching up and down the town square. But he said this is different because it relates to the alt-right movement. And he is an individual that understands it only so well because he's been the target of that. You might remember David French even seriously considered whether or not he would run against Donald Trump as an independent candidate. He did not. But he said journalists, writers, including me and my family, and ordinary citizens were targeted with obscene and threatening images, racist messages, doxing, and sometimes promises of physical violence, all for the sin of criticizing Donald Trump. He goes on to say that this violence then spills into the real world. He gives a couple of examples. A man wielding a sword hunted and killed a black man in New York City. A member of an alt-right nation Facebook group killed another black man in Maryland. A man opened fire on 2 immigrants in a bar in Kansas, killing one. A white supremacist in Portland murdered 2 men on a train who intervened when he harassed a Muslim and her black friend. And he said that's not an exclusive list. Meanwhile, the online hate campaigns roll on. Near the end, though, he says something interestingly enough, that America is at a dangerous crossroads. He says, I know full well that I could have supplemented my list of violent white supremacist acts with a list of vicious killings and riots from left-wing extremists, including the recent act of a lone wolf progressive terror directed at Republican members of the House and Senate. He says there's bloodlust at the political extremes. Now is the time for moral clarity, specific condemnations of vile American movements, no matter how many various hats its members wear, and for actions that back up those appropriately strong words. So he's arguing, obviously, that we certainly should be aware of the fact that there is violence on both sides, and we saw that play itself out in vivid ways in what was taking place in Charlottesville. So if you'd like to join our conversation today, 1-800-351-1212. Let's go back to the phones. We'll go to Stockton, California. Sam, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hello.
Hey, go ahead.
Yes, my name is Sam, and I'm a member of the alt-right.
Tell us what you mean by that. First of all, that would probably be helpful to our listeners.
Yeah, I'm a member of the alt-right. I started around 2015 during the election campaign, during the election season. And we just started popping out of nowhere because we felt that the social justice warriors were persecuting us, and we just woke up, so to speak.
Again, what does that mean to you? Because, you know, the phrase is being thrown around a great deal. So would you agree with some of the actions in Charlottesville? Would you agree with some of the calls to take back America? Would you agree with some of the violence? Where do you, as an individual who calls yourself a member of the alt-right, draw that line? And what would you actually want to do?
Well, what I want to do is, well, first of all, I don't agree with the action at Charlottesville, North Carolina. Some of the things they did were like the protest against the white supremacists, and the white supremacists in general shouldn't have been there at all. But the protest against the white supremacists was an act against freedom of speech. They should just let them protest. That's what I believe. I'm going to let them demonstrate. I don't see what is the problem in that.
Okay. I'm going to go on to another caller, but what would you think our listeners right now misunderstand about the alt-right movement? What is it about? I assume you have other friends that are in it, or at least people that you contact through the internet. What misconceptions do we have about the alt-right? Because I'm going to get into that probably in just a few minutes.
Okay, the alt-right is a backlash against social justice and social justice warriors. We're just a backlash. We praise Kek. You know who Kek is? It's a frog god. That's who we worship. We're a part of Kekistani. Do you know what that is?
You sound like you're making this up, but okay, I'll stay with you for another minute here.
No, I'm serious. We worship a frog deity named Kek.
Okay, well, all right. At least now we know more than we knew before. Let's take another phone call, and we'll go to Arizona. Evan, what would you like to add to the conversation?
Perhaps what I've heard there, the gentleman, I don't think we have the right to protest in this country. I don't believe they're protesting the right to free speech. They're protesting what these people stand for, a counter-protest. Whereas that's American so far as the Nazis and the Klan, I believe it's really elemental. They're in the wrong country. We don't do things that way here. Our charters, the Declaration of Independence, and the Constitution, nowhere in it is any form of bigotry. It's all about equality, and they're in the wrong country. They just need to leave and go to. They're in the wrong country. They're how can they possibly espouse? They're in the wrong country. They need to leave.
Well, and again, that is pretty much what Senator Marco Rubio said in his tweet there. Nothing patriotic about the Nazis, the KKK, or white supremacists, direct opposite of where America seeks to be. And what we're talking about here are the pathology that comes, and this comes from the Wall Street Journal today. They said the particular pathology of display in Virginia was the white nationalist movement. Now, I would put that in a different category as the alt-right. We'll get to that in just a minute, but let's kind of just keep the categories separate. And this one by the editorial board says that, again, the white nationalist movement led by the likes of Richard Spencer, David Duke, and Brad Griffin. They alone are to blame for the violence that occurred when one of their own drove a car into peaceful protesters, killing a young woman and injuring 19 others. And they go on to say that the Spencer crowd, that would be Richard Spencer, courts publicity and protest, and they chose the progressive university town of Charlottesville with malice aforethought. They used the unsubtle Ku Klux Klan symbolism of the torches. You might have seen the torches on a Friday night march. And they seek to appear as political martyrs as a way to recruit more alienated young white men. So that, I think, gives you a little bit of an idea. I want to come back and talk about this idea of identity politics. But one of the other things I've been following here is that there is this Twitter account called Yes, You're Racist. And what they've done is they've been trying to find the pictures and identify some of these people in the marches. And then they will expose those individuals. And one of those individuals they exposed was Cole White, who immediately, when that was exposed, was told that he no longer has a job at the California restaurant where he's employed. The problem with this is right off the bat, what if you misidentify an individual who looks like somebody they're not? You can ruin their reputation online. But more importantly, I've also noticed that then if they see one of these individuals that they identify as racist, there's one where one's standing near a U.S. senator. There's another one where there's one of these individuals standing near a member of Congress. Then you almost get into guilt by association. We saw you at the Charlottesville riot, or the protest, whatever you want to call it. And because you are a member of Congress standing next to them, that makes you a racist too. Do you see how wild this gets really fast? And so one of the things I want to pay attention to is make sure we have the right categories and the right kind of definitions. But we need to take one of those breaks. When we come back, we'll take some more phone calls. Maybe, if we don't have enough time, we'll get into this issue of identity politics and where the ideological roots of extremist violence are found. If we don't cover it today, we'll cover it tomorrow. We'll take some calls right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The topic of immunizations can be controversial to many. Some even have a religious objection to having their children immunized as a requirement to attend public schools. Those objections often fall on deaf ears, but some states have provided for a religious exemption for parents who, for religious reasons, object to their children receiving the needle. Florida falls into that category. So naturally, when Patrick Flynn informed his Florida school that he was invoking that exemption, he was surprised to hear the school refused to follow the law. So he filed a lawsuit. Now, there's an important fact that I haven't told you yet. The school is a private Catholic school. It's not a public school. As such, it is itself protected by the First Amendment to make its own policies in keeping with their faith. A unanimous state appellate court sided with the Catholic diocese, citing the doctrine of church autonomy. Siding with Flynn would, quote, further his own religious views at the expense of the diocese on the topic of immunizations, wrote the court. Quote, we are convinced that a secular court should not be making the judgment as to which side's religious view of immunization is to be respected, unquote. In other words, while Flynn has a right to the protection of his religious beliefs, he may not use the state's judicial arm to compel a private religious institution to depart from its religious beliefs. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Guide at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Right, once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let's go to Missouri this time. Glenn, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View. Glenn, you're on the air.
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, I'm sorry. I was in North Carolina, not Missouri. That's what kind of threw me off.
Oh, that's okay. I wrote it down wrong, or we wrote it down wrong, but I'm glad you're with us. Go ahead.
I have first a comment, and I looked at the videos and all, and what I saw discussing as a veteran and a current employee of the government. I think is wrong what we did, but last time I checked, even though we don't agree with the alt-right, they were there legally with the proper permits and everything, minding their own business until the other protesters who were there illegally shows up.
True.
And they started throwing the first punches.
Yeah,
So,
Antifa. Yep, that's right.
And then you come back to self-defense and the right to defend yourself and your beliefs, whether they're right or wrong in our opinion. But I believe, looking at some of the photographs, I saw a couple of faces from BLM that just happened to show up here again, and they're known as paid agitators. So what does that tell you on top of everything else? And my last statement is, correct me if I'm wrong, back in the days of Prohibition and all that, it was the Southern Democrats who enslaved the blacks who came up with welfare and job fairs and stuff like this. So, and then they talk about the white supremacists. I understood what one caller stated, but I think it's a little off base on the alt-right, because the alt-right has always been individuals who felt that you've rebelled against us because we're white. Not because we've done something wrong to you, just because of our skin color, and trying to actually reverse what is called bias against white, just like it's supposed that we are biased against blacks. As a veteran, I take it as a personal offense. As an American, I take it as a personal offense. I see American as American no matter what your color, as long as you're here illegally. Thank you.
Well, again, he points out some things, some of which we've talked about with Dinesh D'Souza. It's so funny. We had Dinesh D'Souza in studio last week. I'd love to have him in this week, because just talking about Antifa, which stands for anti-fascist, and which many of them were using that. But at the same time, we want to certainly recognize the right of individuals to protest, to have a rally. Now they're asking to have a rally in Richmond because of the possibility that they would tear down a statue of Robert E. Lee in Richmond, Virginia. So we'll see how this will play itself out over the next couple of days and weeks. Let's go back to Arizona, KNLB. Gary, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hi, it might be a stupid question, but I've heard the term for the last couple of days. I don't know what that alt, A-L-T, I assume that's how it's spelled,
right.
Alt-right, or alt, what does that mean?
Well, and that was what I was kind of planning on, but we had some calls kind of going the other direction, because I wanted to try to do some education. Maybe we'll do more of it tomorrow. But let me explain it real quickly, because it's the kind of the right-wing alternative. And the best article is maybe one I was going to post but did not. So I'll post it for tomorrow by Jeffrey Tucker. And it takes you into kind of the ideological roots, because his argument, and I think it's really well done, is that this isn't so much about bad people as it is about bad ideas that kind of come into an individual. And so the idea is sort of almost group psychology. You just heard a little bit of it just a minute ago from Sam, and a little bit of it, I think, even with Glenn. But again, the idea here is that you have certain individuals that are taking away your rights, and fill in the blank. For those that might be white supremacists, it might be blacks or Jews. For others, it might be women. For those, it might be the Antifa, the anti-fascist, whatever it might be. And so as a result, these ideas really have a common core. And so what I'd like to maybe do at Point of View maybe this week is something we've done at Point of View in the past, and that is to really kind of educate you about these ideas. Back in the 1980s, for example, we tried to educate you about secular humanism. Then in the late 1980s and 1990s, tried to educate you about the New Age movement. And I think it's going to be important to really try to educate you about some of these various groups, including this idea of the alt-right. But the kind of the core, if you wanted to kind of identify one book, this Jeffrey Tucker says would be the book called The Turner Diaries. Now, you might, if you really have a great memory, remember the Turner Diaries. I remember that was quoted during the Columbine shooting, and these were written by, the pen name was Andrew MacDonald. The real author was William Pierce. And it was an individual that told this story of the need for us to reverse history. The story, and I'm kind of going to give you a spoiler alert, but I really don't want you to read the book anyway. It's a story of a small junta of whites who set out to reverse history And they do that with a series of killings. They start by killing Jews, then blacks, then communists, and inevitably they become kind of the apologists for all of this. And when you learn early on that this movement is absolutely kind of socialist, as he says, just in a different way with the sort of the left-wing socialists, so they're not so much red shirts. They're kind of like what we talked about last week with Dinesh D'Souza. They're kind of the brown shirts, but they have a different agenda. It's a kind of a racial struggle, a gender identity struggle, a religious struggle. And so as a result, according to this fictional book, they turn the masses on their side with a growing amount of bloodshed. They gain control of the government. They set up a centrally planned socialist state, get a hold of a nuclear stockpile, and slaughter all the non-whites in the world. That's the Turner Diaries. Now, does everybody in the alt-right read that book? No, but is where that give you a little bit of an idea where those ideas come from? Well, of course they do. As we just mentioned a minute ago, the white nationalist movement, Richard Spencer, David Duke, Brad Griffin. So I'm going to try over the next few days, if we can, to kind of educate you, because, Gary, you've got a very good question. You deserve a much better answer, and I look at the clock and I don't have a lot of time to cover it today, but we will come back to this idea to help you understand what is in kind of the hearts and the minds of these extreme groups, and to really begin to understand that we have sometimes on this program helped you understand a little bit about these various extremist groups on the left, whether it's funded by George Soros or a variety of other groups, and certainly we have seen that. But then also to point out that there are a growing number on the right that need to be identified as well. And so this is why I, again, encourage those of you in the church to speak out against some of this extremism, especially since there's pretty good evidence, and we'll read from that tomorrow in Rod Dreyer's piece, that a lot of these young people that actually are part of the white nationalists and neo-Nazis or the alt-right are sometimes individuals in your churches, and you might not even be aware of that. So those are some things that we'll do our best to try to educate you about over the next couple of days here at Point of View, and hope that you'll stay tuned every single day so that we can educate you about these topics and you'll understand more about what's taking place in the world around you. If you'd like to know a little bit more about the issue of North Korea in particular, we spent an hour with Gary Bauer in the first hour, and that article is available on our website. Then I have 3 articles that I would encourage you to read. One on the absurdity of a supreme race, one on Charlottesville and the church's response, and a very good piece that gets you started on understanding what the alt-right is all about, which is by David French, and they're all available at our website, pointofview.net. As you go there, if you appreciate some of the things you've learned even today, can I ask at least some of you, as we're in the month of August, to encourage you to maybe click on that button that says donate and help us out, because we would greatly appreciate it. I want to thank Andrew, as well as Steve and Elisa, for their help behind the scenes. Look forward to our conversation tomorrow with Kirk Cameron and with you. All that coming up tomorrow right here on Point of View.
Would you like to be above average or exceptional? I'll explain how you can be in a moment. What do you think about change? Some people love it, others not so much. I'm guessing you agree our culture needs change, but how will that happen? Change happens with you and your influence. If each of us does our part, God can change the culture through us. That's a goal at Point of View, to help you change things around you. We never charge for the information we deliver each day, but that information is not free. There is a significant cost in getting it to you. You know who helps us do that? About 1 out of every 800 listeners to Point of View. So you can be above average. You can be exceptional by visiting pointofview.net and clicking the banner Change Happens with You, or by calling 1-800-347-5151. Thank you for being exceptional by supporting Point of View. Pointofview.net at 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.